Welcome to the Writer Groupie Podcast. I'm Kim Smith, the writing guru, bringing you discussions, insights, and insider details on planning, producing, promoting, and profiting as a writer. This is a podcast by writers for writers. You can find out more about Writer Groupie at www.writergroupie.net. And here's the next episode of Writer Groupie. Okay, everybody, and here we are, episode 51 of Writer Groupie. Yeah, I can't believe it, 51 episodes. And then we have some extra ones, so we actually have more than 51, but 51 performing professional episodes there. And today my guest is Jordan Nasser, and Jordan's the author of Home is a Fire and the Fire Went Wild. And Jordan's a former Tennessean, I'm very proud to say. So Jordan, welcome to Writer Groupie. Won't you tell us a little bit about you and your writing life?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here, first of all. I just want to say.
You're welcome. I'm so excited.
And, you know, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I'm from Tennessee originally as well. I'm from Knoxville, so I'm not too far from you. But somewhere in my 20s, I left Knoxville and I moved to New York. And I lived in New York City for 13 years. And I was working for a company called H&M, which is a big fashion company. And I was working in advertising. And long story short, I got transferred to Stockholm, Sweden. And so now I've been in Sweden for about 7.5 years, and I live here in Stockholm. And about 1.5 years ago, I decided I needed a break and I needed a change. And I'd been working in marketing and advertising for 15 years and been working nonstop since I was 18, and I'm 46 right now. So I knew that I wanted to take at least a year off and just sort of reassess and reevaluate and sort of see what happens with my life and where I was going to go next. And about 3 months into this journey of relaxation, I thought to myself, you know, I don't want to finish this year and not have something that I can hold in my hands that I accomplished. Because at the time I was getting a tan and I was having fun and I was relaxing and having all these great experiences. And I'd always worked with digital things that you couldn't really hold. So I wanted something that I could hold in my hands and say, I did this, this is mine.
Hey, stick that up here so we can see that better.
Absolutely.
This is the cover to the first book, Home is a Fire. Wonderful. Great cover.
Absolutely.
I love it.
Thank you so much. I'll tell you about the cover in a second. But so what happened was I had started this small snippet of a story one night while I was waiting to get into a club, and I was just sitting there, and the first line popped into my head. And I've always been addicted to the first line of books, and so I put that first line down, and then a few days later at work I was having a particularly bad day, and I closed the office door and I started writing. And then fast forward to 1.5 years later, and I left my job, and I thought, I'm going to take that snippet and I'm just going to run with it. And I started writing. And 49,000 words later, I ended up with a book. And it's my first book. It's called Home is a Fire. And it's funny because I was having this reevaluation with my life and being from Tennessee and living so far away from home for so long. I wrote a book about going home again, about leaving New York, about leaving the rat race, about leaving all the things that were making you unhappy. And I knew that I wanted to write a book that featured a romantic comedy, that featured 2 men. But I didn't want it to be overtly sexual. I didn't want it to be something my parents couldn't read. I wanted it to be something that my friends who I grew up with in conservative East Tennessee could actually read the book and still recognize themselves in their own lives, whether they were gay or straight or single or married or divorced, it doesn't matter. I just wanted to write a book about going home to small town life as an adult and realizing that the person you were when you left isn't the person you are when you go home. And that's sort of where it all began.
I love it. I've read it from cover to cover now, and I can't wait to dive into the sequel, which is called The Fire Went Wild.
Absolutely.
And I'm telling you guys, if you haven't gotten either of these books yet, please go and get them. I'm telling you, I've been so entertained ever since I started reading it. And I'm just proud for you being a debut author that you've done so well. I noticed on Amazon you had like 49 reviews, and that might be because I gave you one this morning. It might have been 48. But they're all 5- and 4-star reviews. You've really impressed the reading public. And so, writer to writer, I got to say, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. How does that feel?
It feels amazing. When I first put the book out, I was literally scared to death. Well, not literally. I was scared to death. I thought, can I do this? Can I really do this? And you're not sure whether something is good or not. And that self-doubt, that follows anyone in a creative field, whether they're an actor or a singer or a dancer or a writer. You create something and you think it's good to yourself, but you're not sure. And I was so unsure of the book, to be quite honest, that I went ahead and wrote the second book before I even put the first book out.
Wow.
So,
that's unusual.
And wrote The Fire Went Wild because I was afraid that if I put the first book out and everyone hated it, then I would never write the second book.
I gotcha.
And you hear about writers who have this great first book but never follow it up. And I didn't want to have that hanging over my head that I couldn't follow up this first book. So I went ahead and wrote the second one. But the reviews have been absolutely fantastic. And the nice thing is when you get reviews from people you don't know. I mean, a lot of those reviews are from people I do know. I'll admit that. But people who I don't know have written me reviews. And that has been absolutely amazing. The funniest thing, my friend Morgan, she and her boyfriend Jamie, they both bought a copy of the book. And they went to Mexico to a resort. So they each had their own copy because they said, we want to sit on the beach and we want to read your books. And after they finished the books, Morgan wrote me a quick mail on Facebook. And she said, hey, I hope you don't mind, but Jamie and I decided we would leave one book behind and we would put it in the resort library. She said, I'm just doing some guerrilla marketing for you. So I stuck it on the bookshelf, just stuck it there. 3 days later, I get an email on Facebook from someone I have no idea who she is. Her name is Lynn. Lynn writes me and says, hi, I hope this is the person who wrote this book, but I just want to tell you, I'm at a resort in Mexico, and I ran across your book, and I absolutely love it, and I want to know who you are, and how did you write this, and where did this come from, and I'm going to tell all my friends.
Oh,
so
awesome.
It's just so nice.
It is, and it's so well written, Jordan. That's the thing that just impressed me the most, is because most people that want their first book, while as a general rule it's good, the story is well, put together, there's facets of it and some aspects of a new writer that you just you recognize as being that new writer thing. Didn't see any of that in your book, and really was curious to know, did you have it edited by a professional editor? I mean, how did you make it into this really fantastically well-written book as a first book? I couldn't do it myself, and so I have to ask that.
You're very, very kind, I have to say that. Thank you so much. I think inherently I'm a storyteller. I started in college. I got a degree in theater arts, in theater. So I double majored in theater and French. So I think I've always been obsessed with language and storytelling in some way, shape, or form. And I've always kept a journal and written to myself. So writing in first person has always come really naturally to me. And I know a lot of writers are unsure if they're going to write in first person or third person. But for me, writing in first person was just the easiest first step because I could feel this character in my head. I went ahead and I wrote an entire first draft is what I did, before I got any feedback. And in my second book, I did that differently. But I'll tell you, in the first book, I think that was a mistake. I didn't do any editing to the end. Oh. And by the time you get to the end, you've really written yourself into a lot of corners, and there's not a lot you can change unless you're changing huge sections. Right. So I finished the story, and I sent it to a friend of mine who's also a writer. And she took a look at it, and she gave me a lot of feedback that basically said, it's good, it's a great first draft, but you really need to fill out the story a bit more. It was just a basic idea. So I was lucky in that the way I had written it, I could go back in and expand some of the scenes. It didn't change the story, but it expanded the scenes, and I was able to do that.
Well, it made your characters feel more real to me, to follow them around in their day-to-day activities. You know, they go out at night and they're a group of friends and they share stuff with each other. To me, it just made it more well-rounded.
Thank you. And I think that what you'll find when you read the second book is that the first book is really very much about these two characters, Derek and Luke, and it's about them finding each other and sort of their small sort of social circle. But you don't really you don't get so involved in that social circle much more than when Derek and Luke are with them. So in the second book, all the feedback and the reviews I got said that they loved these secondary characters. So I made sure in the second book that it's not just about the two guys, it's really about everyone. And I call them the Scooby Gang. You know, everyone gets involved in this big storyline in the second book. So I really pulled everyone into the story. But some feedback I can give to writers about that, about editing, to answer your question, I did not use a professional editor. But
I'm so impressed.
Well, thank you. But I'm very lucky that I have really good friends, you know, some fantastic people out there. But what I learned is, instead of just sending it out and saying, can you read this and give me feedback, I made very sure to pick certain people who I knew their traits and their talents and say, can you read this and find typographical errors? That's your only job. Another friend I asked, I only want you to tell me about story and characterization. Another friend, I said sentence structure. If there are clunky sentences or sentences that need more power to them, or places where I've said the same word too many times. So I really tried to just pick specific things and get some feedback.
Awesome. What a wonderful idea. I've never even thought about doing such a thing. I could do that so easily with my group of friends are all writers. And so, you know, each one of them in their own work, I find specific things that I think are unique to their, their voice or their writing style. That's the kind of stuff that I should maybe ask them to do for me. That's very, very wonderful. And I think that you would probably get kind of maybe a more honest, kind of less clinical feel to an edit that way, rather than taking it to a professional editor and saying, you know, here's my book, will you please edit it or whatever. They're going through the whole thing and doing all of those things, and maybe none of those things are their specific specialty. Does that make sense?
Exactly. And here's the thing, too, is these friends who I trust, they know my voice. They've known me since I was 10. And I mean, some of these stories are based on little things that happened and little pieces of things that happened. They know this town, they know these characters, they know this feeling, they know me, they know the words that I choose, and I really trust what they say.
That's great. That is so awesome. Now I got to ask you, how long did it take for you to write, since you wrote, the first book, and then you wrote the second book before you wrote the first book? Altogether, 2 books has got to be at least, 160,000 words or somewhere in there?
Well, my first book is just under 50,000. It's about 49,000 words. The second book is around 65,000.
There you go. That's a lot of words.
And the third book is on schedule to be about 75.
Oh, so you're working on a third one. Oh, yay! I'm so excited. Great news for Super Bowl Sunday. Woohoo!
What I learned, though, is along the way, while writing the second book, what I do now is I stick to a really strict schedule. What I do is I wake up in the morning and I edit for about an hour and a half the words that I wrote the day before. Now, I could have written 50 words, I could have written 5,000 words. On my best day, I'll write 5,000. I only average around 1,000 to 2,000 words a day. So I spend the morning editing what I wrote the day before. Then I have lunch, clear my mind, watch something on television, watch a silly show, and then I sit down and I spend a minimum of 2 hours writing fresh words. And I don't edit them at all. And some days, as I said, I get 50 words out, some days 2,000, 3,000. So that the next day I come back to edit them. And that way you get a little bit of distance from your words, and you don't feel this pressure right then to edit it. But I didn't make the mistake I made in the first book, which was wait to the very end to edit.
Would you call yourself a pantser, a plotter or a hybrid of the two?
I don't know the first word, pantser.
Pantser?
By the seat of my pants?
You write by the seat of your pants. You just start out writing. You have no idea who the characters are going to be, where they're going to end up taking you. You just kind of go by the seat of your pants. I'm a hybrid. I start out writing that way, but once I get a feel for those characters and I know they start telling me their story, then I can kind of do an outline, be a lot more plot, focused.
It's a great question because I think when you read the first book, the first 3 chapters are very organic. They are very much seat of my pants, seeing where the words took me. And then I spoke to a friend, and he said, Jordan, you can't just write a book organically. You really need to know where you're going. And so I knew what my main conflict was going to be. I knew that it was going to be resolved in a certain way, but I didn't know exactly how it was going to be resolved. So I semi-plotted it in what I call, I made little Twitter lines for each chapter. So I took about 2 or 3 sentences for each chapter to say what I thought was going to happen. The thing that was surprising was there are a few big reveals and big moments in the first book that didn't happen at all the way I planned them. Because, and you as a writer, you know this, sometimes your characters come to life. And they say something or do something that you did not plan, you had no idea where it came from, and it changes the whole direction of your book, and it's absolutely amazing.
And there is no better feeling when a character just goes off completely on a tangent, and you're like, holy cow, when did this happen? How did this happen? Where are we going with this, guys? And then it's just fun. That's when writing a novel especially becomes fun because you're on this journey and the characters are taking you by the hand saying, come on, we got the story to tell you, we want to show you. It's just interesting. It's interesting how the writer mind works.
Yeah, it's absolutely strange because I think that in some ways we're always collecting thoughts and sentences in our head. I mean, I can say that I edit an hour a day and I sit down and write for 2 hours a day. So that's 3 hours a day that I'm working on it. But the reality is that, another 10 hours of the day, I'm listening to things people say. I'm pulling in ideas and thoughts and settings. When I dream, I wake up in the middle of the night and I'll dictate something into my phone really quickly, or I'll write a funny sentence, or a friend will say something that I think is just hysterical and I'll write it down really quick, and I know that it's perfect for one of my characters because we're always pulling from stuff from everyday life. It's absolutely brilliant.
My latest release is called Disc of Death. It's a reprisal of a former book that I had put out in the 2008 area. And the sidekick character is very much a comedic type of sidekick character who has these wonderful sayings. And anytime I hear anybody say something that's a Dwayneism, his name is Dwayne, I'm like, oh my God, that's going in a book. That's a Dwayneism. So I totally understand what you're saying. And it's like, you can't get it down fast enough. You can't dictate it fast enough to capture that because to you at that moment it's so funny or so intense or so whatever. I almost have problem keeping up with all the notes that I do that way because you never know where you're going to be, where it's going to strike, and how you're going to get it captured.
Exactly. I've had friends actually write me up and say, Jordan, oh my God, I just hit page 49, third paragraph, and I'm going to kill you. I said those exact words to you. But I think it's funny. They love it.
Well, I got to tell you, part of being a writer is being a reader. I think that we are all readers to begin with, and that may be part of the reason why we become writers is because for me, I read a book that it didn't end the way I wanted it to. It ended to, okay, what happens now? In my mind. So the first book I ever wrote was a YA fantasy. For me, it was the continuation of what happened after The Hobbit. I didn't like how The Hobbit ended. I wanted to know what happens now. They can't just go off to the Grey Havens, okay? That's not good enough for me. So my first book was a YA fantasy where I continued that idea. And so reading books kind of influences us as writers. And so I wanted to know what kinds of books you read and how has that influenced the writing of these books?
Yeah, I think that Armistead Maupin, he wrote a series of books called Tales of the City that take place in an apartment complex in San Francisco in the 80s, basically. And the thing that I loved about these books were two things. One, that it featured gay characters, that it wasn't just focused on the fact they were gay. They were just characters that were in a book, which is like everyday life, which I very much appreciated that at that time in my life. And the second thing that I really thought was smart is he wrote short chapters that always ended with a little catch that made you want to move on to the next chapter. And
you love it, but you hate it.
well, I love it, and I think I heavily pulled upon that writing style when I wrote Home is a Fire. I like a chapter that's 8 to 15 pages that you don't feel like you have to invest 2 hours in. You can sit down, you can read it before you go to bed, you can read it on the subway in the morning, you can read it quite quickly, but it ends in a way that there's a little hook that you think, oh no, what's going to happen next, and I want to move on to the next chapter. So I really loved that. I love that. So Armistead Maupin was definitely an influence on me. I love Douglas Copeland. He writes a book called Generation X, and he wrote very much sort of before it was considered YA, young adult lit, that he wrote about that those disaffected youth in Generation X in the early 90s, early 2000s, and I thought that spoke to me in a really nice way as sort of an updated Catcher in the Rye kind of feel.
Oh, okay.
So I thought that was really cool. But I just love fiction. I think fiction is great.
And for some people, they feel like fiction is probably the hardest thing that they've ever been able to produce. But once they got it produced, then the aspect that comes afterwards, the publishing and the marketing aspect of it, was impossible. I mean, I talk to a lot of writers. I have a lot of writers come on this show. And I always ask them, what are you doing to market your book? And it's like the variety of ways that people are trying to get the word out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like the marketing favorites change weekly. Mm-hmm. One person, 1 week will say, oh, you got to do this. And the next week they're like, oh, no, don't do that. Everybody's doing that. Do this. So how are you getting the word out besides podcasts and just general one book after the other?
Overall, I think I've told some of my friends this before, that for me, the writing was hard but manageable. The editing was difficult, much more so than the writing, but the marketing and promotion has been twice as difficult as the editing. I've had a really, really difficult time. I have a lot of friends on Facebook. I probably have 1,400 friends, and I know them all personally, and I so naively thought, I've given to their AIDS rides and their March of Dimes and their cystic fibrosis, and I've bought Girl Scout cookies from them, and I've done all the things I've done as a good friend. So all 1,000 Facebook friends, they're going to buy my book on the first day. And of course, it just doesn't happen. No, and you can't expect that to happen. So I made a lot of sort of naive assumptions there. And I have a lot of friends who work in media and publishing and publicity and PR, and I thought they would all jump in and help. And the reality is they have paying clients. You're their friend, but you can't ask for a lot of favors. So
right.
I had to do a lot of research, and I was never a big user of Twitter before, and I realized you've got to really find that niche. And I told you this at the beginning. I don't consider my book just gay fiction. To me, my book is a fiction story that happens to feature a same-gender couple. But I realized that if I niched myself into this gay fiction, I would have a group of more loyal, perhaps, readers that I could latch onto and perhaps then expand after that.
Right.
So I went onto Twitter and found groups and found focus groups and niches and started adding all these people. And it's great. I found a great group of other writers and other friends and other fans who are into the same things you're into, and Twitter has been really, really helpful. The second thing was podcasts. And simply, people like you need content. And it's pretty much the only sort of channel out there that still needs content, because there's a lot of podcasts. But there's already too many videos and too many magazine articles and too many blog posts, and you can't get into them. And you can barely get your book reviewed. So I went into new and noteworthy podcasts and went into fiction, and I just wrote a bunch of cold letters. I actually wrote to The Advocate, which is a a gay news website and said, "I'll give you the first chapter of my book." And I didn't expect them to write me back, but they did. So they published the first chapter of my book. So a lot of things have been cold calling, and I've just been lucky.
Well, that's the one thing that I have not done with any of my work is, I guess, just cold called. It's always been somebody that I knew or somebody that I knew that knew someone, which is why I started my podcast, because it not only benefits authors such as yourself, to promote their work, but it helps me promote mine as well, because whoever heard of Kim Smith? I mean, believe me, if you thought I was the beautiful swimsuit model, you're my new best friend. But I mean, we have to do what we have to do to get the word out, and however it works for us, I think that's just the best thing ever.
It's funny, though. I had friends who swore up and down, who said, if you sell 1,000 books, you'll have no problem getting an agent or a publisher, because it's hard to sell 1,000 books these days.
It is.
Well, I sold 1,000 books, and I still can't get an agent or a publisher. So all these thresholds, I think, are imaginary. You just have to. It's bottling, lightning. You got to catch that lightning.
Well, I have always said that you can go the traditional route, but you must go into it knowing that it is not a quick and dirty process. It is a very time-consuming and almost emotionally wrenching experience, because there's a lot of rejection going that way.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I did the small publisher thing for years and years. Those publishers went out of business.
Yeah.
So I was resolved to doing nothing but self-publishing.
Okay.
And I will never look back, because I did not know this about myself until now, but I like the freedom. I really enjoy the opportunities that self-publishing offers. And I kind of hate the word self-publishing. I think it should change to indie publishing, because in today's world, there's indie everything. There's indie farmers, there's indie musicians, indie artists, and indie book providers, which is what we are. And so, being an indie to me is really, I get all the control and freedom that I need to create my own covers, to, purchase my editing services from whoever I think can give me the best job. If we don't like how it turns out, we can take it down and we can put a new cover on it and we can change some things about it. We have those freedoms that you just can't do in traditional publishing. So to me, our industry today is really becoming a hybrid model. There's so many people that were traditionally published that are now doing things themselves. Mm-hmm. There's some people that are doing it both. They're hybrids. They're true hybrids. And then there's those of us who are doing it all on our own. And I don't have anything to say about any of that other than to each his own, whatever works best for you. Personally, I like being an indie.
Well, I did a lot of research beforehand because, again, naively, I had my sights set on HarperCollins, and then suddenly you realize HarperCollins isn't going to call. So I knew that I wanted, like I said, to hold that book in my hand. So I did want a printed book. A lot of indie publishers now are purely digital, but I wanted something that I could hold in my hand. So print on demand was, for me, the way to go, because then you pay a setup fee for the book, and then it's done. It's paid for. And then after that, each time it's printed, your costs just get taken out of the final cost. So you still make a little bit of money each time. So I looked at a lot of suppliers and chose CreateSpace, which goes through Amazon. So I've used CreateSpace for my Kindle and my print on demand. Then there's another company called Draft to Digital,
right,
which I use for my digital. And what I do with them is I simply provide the digital file, and they send it to Barnes & Noble Nook, and they send it to iBooks, and Scribd, and Kobo, and all these other sites that I didn't even know existed. And there's huge fans of these sites in particular. And so I find that you have to be in a lot of places. Absolutely. Have you done the same?
I have not. I have been exclusive to Amazon and CreateSpace. I'm also one of my novels is ACX. It's an audio book. I've done everything in Amazon, and to be really honest, it's just total utter laziness on my part. I don't know that I've got enough energy to try and figure out how to do the formatting for anybody else's distribution method. I swore that this next book that's coming out, that I would go wide with it, that I would try and draft digital or Smashwords or one of those distribution outlets to help me get it into other places. But I haven't done it yet. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I thought, well, it's just so quick and easy just to do 90 days. I'll just do 90 days on KDP and see how it goes. So we'll see. I may still do that, just because I've got so many friends that are doing it, and they're like, you just got to try it. You really do need to get out there and try it.
Yeah.
I think I would cover a lot more international space by going wide. But I don't know that my books necessarily have international appeal. How does it work for you being in an international place and reaching, I don't want to say backwards, but you're reaching into the American market from, you're in Sweden, you're coming back into America, but you being outside of America, how does that work? Is that, if you find it any difficult, or is it just like being here?
I think that the funny thing is last September I went home for a few weeks, home to Tennessee, and I usually only get home about once a year. And going home, getting immersed in Southern culture and eating biscuits and gravy and drinking beer out of pitchers and going to the local
Don't forget the grits.
Grits, all that stuff. It inspired me again to write this whole Southern feeling again, and I didn't realize how much I really missed it. Mm-hmm. So I think in some ways writing this book has reaffirmed that it doesn't matter where I live. I'm still a Southerner. I'm still a Tennessean. I mean, that's who I am. So it doesn't matter where I live. And I mean, my dad and I, and we FaceTime every weekend. So we still talk once a week, and I talk to my friends on Facebook, and we text each other. And it doesn't matter where you live anymore. You can be a global citizen but still be a Tennessean, and that's been great.
I wish I was younger so that I could involve myself in more of those kinds of things. It appeals to me very much today to be location free. I would like to be totally non-specific in my location. I would like to be sitting in a coffee shop somewhere in London and writing a book.
Yeah.
I can sit in Panera Bread in my hometown and pretend that I'm in London, of course. But, being location non-specific, you have that opportunity to be immersed in another culture. You're sitting in Sweden, but you could be writing your story set in Tennessee. I mean, it's not really where you are as much as it is what's in your head.
Exactly. And that's the thing, too, is I've written to friends and said, hey, do you remember that health teacher we had in high school? What is it he used to say? And just things like that pop into my head. So I use my sources.
Your books are full of that kind of thing. It's almost like we're listening to you thinking out loud and some of the memories that your character has of his time in his hometown. Out of all the characters in your books, which one is your favorite?
I love the Uncle Barry. He's my absolute favorite. So I can't give away the twist too much, but when Derek leaves New York and he comes home and he lives with his mom and his Uncle Barry again, he finds a lot of skeletons in the closet that are, I think, some fun page turners there. But he's just a fun character to write, and I love that I've got all these characters who are really quirky, and I think they all have their own individual voice.
They do. And they really do.
It's such a great time to write.
Oh, gosh. Jordan, I could talk to you forever. We're down to the last few minutes of the show, unfortunately. And at this time, I always ask my authors, tell us something that you would give in advice to an aspiring author, something maybe you wish someone had told you when you were getting started.
Yeah. The quickest, down and dirty, easy advice is, even if writing is a hobby, you can't treat it like a hobby. You have to treat it like a job. You have to treat it like a job that's scheduled. So like I told you earlier, I have my schedule in the morning where I edit and my schedule in the afternoon where I write. And the moment I veer away from that, I suddenly stop writing. And I get involved with friends and going out for coffee or a drink or a dinner or just a million things that can distract me. So you have to pretend it's a job. You don't pretend it's a job, but it is a job. And really focus on that. And the second bit of advice, edit as you go. If you wait to the end, you are in a heap of trouble.
Yeah, because I'm one of those authors who I do believe that you can't see the forest for the trees. I mean, sometimes you've looked at it and read it and looked at it and read it to the point where you don't even see the typos anymore.
Exactly.
So if you get away from it for a hot minute and come back to it, generally you'll find where you've made the mistake. So very good advice, Jordan. And I'm just so pleased that you came on my podcast. This has just been really fun. And I love the books. Please, people, go get these books. You're going to love them. They're totally entertaining. They're like my guilty pleasure. I was telling you offline, I get on my treadmill and I'm just reading these books, and I'm so involved in the story, I forget I'm on the treadmill. I'm going to fall off and break my neck one day doing this.
Well, I don't want to be responsible for that, but I'm so happy for bringing a smile to your face, and I cannot wait until you read the second book of Fire Went Wild, because I promise you that journey just goes and goes.
That's great, and I'm excited there's going to be another one behind these. And I hope you'll plan on coming back. I would love for you to come back on the show, maybe with the third book. We'll do a little more promoting and see how things have transpired for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Writer Groupie. For booking information, show notes, and more, visit writergroupie.net.